This is that out of thin air.
That's, yeah, but it wasn't noisy before.
No, it wasn't.
They sound like
It's one of those things.
But
if
now
you
it's
don't
less
have it,
noisy.
If you don't have it, you don't need it. Once you hear it, you don't want to go back.
Yeah.
You sure you want
Now
to listen to vinyl? Are you leaving for 3 weeks? You'll forget.
Yeah,
You'll
I
forget.
won't. That's a quiet record. The sound stage seems deeper because there's more space for it to go into.
Noise. It's like your layers. Your layers have a tendency to merge
They're
together.
kinda closer together.
Then when the layers stop being noisy, you start to realize that they move apart.
That phono stage, I knew it was good. Then I upgraded my amp.
Yeah.
I knew it was really good. And I put that amp. I'm like, oh, that actually does other things really well too. And now with this, it's like, oh, I don't have to change my phono stage at all.
I'd be very happy with this.
That's high praise because your system is dialed.
Well, I mean, you heard some of the reasons, some of
Yeah.
the things that contribute to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Because I heard similarities to my system.
I attributed it mostly to your drivers and your speakers and kind of your biamp setup.
It's not.
But
if you have a transparent amplifier and a transparent pre-amplifier,
Just-
and your speakers are very revealing, your speakers are extremely revealing, and so is that Krell amp, because you felt like it sounded almost like my place, but there's still two massive differences, three massive differences.
yeah.
But it
It's
shows
still
you that they're not coloring the sound.
Remote's there, you can put it as loud as you like.
All right. You missed my first reaction. Oh, the camera got me though. You set this all up so that I wouldn't leave. Glorious whiskey, track selection already. What an evening. Showed up at Dave's, pours me a whiskey. I sit down in a sweet spot, puts on a record, and these Carver speakers, driven by a vintage Krell amplifier. It's an old one, pure Class A. I forget what I'm there for. I'm supposed to be there to document, make a video. That I'm listening to music because it sounded just lush, warm, inviting. That energy that comes off a record. I'm going to tell you right now, for me, I don't care about the audiophile BS that is associated to listening to a vinyl record. If you have a vinyl collection and you have a good turntable and a good phono stage, it's the energy that comes off a record. There's something about that energy that is projected into the room that is intoxicating. Forget being an audiophile. It's intoxicating. I could find things to optimize with that presentation. But while I'm sitting there listening with a glass in hand, I forgot what I was there for. Hell yeah! It was relaxing. Felt like I was at a nice lounge. Dave's a great guy to talk to. When I mean great guy to talk to, he's a guy who's open-minded, shares what he thinks without imposing biases. It's one of those rare individuals you come across that it is pleasant to have a conversation with. So after spending a good amount of time listening to Dave's system and getting a good idea of what it is that was happening, I had brought two things for fun, for an experiment. I brought my Frankenstein DAC, my Musical Paradise, my heavily customized Musical Paradise. Whoa. Slow the fuck down. Let's talk about the differences between the two systems first. What does Dave rig do well compared to what my rig does well, and where things can be improved? All right, let's check that out first. Then we'll talk about the DAC and the stuff that I brought over. Let me jump quickly to what I found was really good about Dave's rig and what I thought could be improved. So the first thing is the resolution. Dave's resolution is actually really good, and it maintains that resolution and separation of instruments at any genre of music. This system could play just about everything. Yeah, even if it's just an old Class A amplifier, those speakers with that amp is a great match. It could play all genres of music. It was really, really good. The bass performance, to have these open baffle speakers dig down to the 20 hertz region is felt. You could tell. Like there's like a deep range to these kick drums that go all the way down. And it's not that the drum sounds better, but the acoustics around the drum feel better. Like there's a sense of scale that really is felt thanks to that low end frequency. The sound when he plays analog, when he puts on a record, the warmth that comes out, the sense of you just feel happy and euphoric. You just want to sit there and listen to music. You don't want to analyze like an audiophile. Like Dave must just go down there and just relax, forget about anything that happened during the day. That's his system. It's warm, it's rich in bass, detail, and performance. And the soundstage is decent, which brings me to the things that I think could be improved. So the first thing that was also very obvious when I kicked myself in the head to say, okay, go into analytic mode, let's see what's going on here. So the first thing is that there were a few veils in front of a system. And having a veil, to me, I can tell that there's resolution, but I can also see that there was a veil. An experience told me that when I had that veil in my rig, I remember what fixed it. I'm not going to say it now. We'll see later. So because things were veiled, I think it also impacted the amount of layers that we could feel in his soundstage. So the soundstage was mostly positioned slightly behind the speakers with some depth, but not crazy depth, especially considering the speakers go down into the 20 hertz range. Usually when you have that 20 hertz range covered, you expand a depth of your soundstage. But I think because there were veils in the presentation, it kind of muffled the two together. So you have the layers, you could tell they were there, but things were not as three-dimensional and present, I'd say, than what it could be. The other thing is, as part of the soundstage, you didn't have that wraparound effect, that three-dimensionality where you feel like things could be behind you and on the sides. That could be positioning in the room. Sure, possible, but not a game breaker. Because to tell you the truth, of all the systems I've heard in my life, very few have that wraparound effect. It's got to be dialed, and I mean dialed, and you have to be lucky to have the space to allow this to happen. I've never experienced it in a small confined room. It's always when you're in a space where the speakers get to breathe outside of the walls and the sound waves can properly generate inside the room. That's when I've had it. The other thing that I would improve, especially when it listens to acoustic or jazz or blues, is to improve the decay. So because his speakers are very fast, I find that they could use something in the chain, via a choke probably, to add a bit of that decay. And people are like, well, just use tubes. Tubes doesn't necessarily give you a decay. And as a matter of fact, in my experience, a really good tube, a tube that has a really good consistent flow of electrons that comes off its plates, is actually going to sound more clean and actually not have as much decay. So let me explain what I mean. I've had bad tubes, I've had normal, okay tubes, I've had good tubes, and I've had phenomenal tubes. Tubes that were okay, tubes that are bad or noisy, add unwanted distortion. So think about distortion. I think distortion in music production can be a great thing because it's controlled, it's what the artist wants, and it's done in a way that enhances the emotions and the message that the artist wants to convey or the engineer wants to convey. However, distortion introduced in music playback that is not part of the material, I find that can be distracting or can take away from the experience. So bad tubes will be noisy, they'll add too much distortion. Tubes that are okay You won't feel the noise too much, so you'll have a good separation of your instruments. You'll have a good idea of your layering, but you're going to get a little bit of that distortion, and depending on, oh boy, depending on where and how that tube was burnt in, it'll affect its flow of electron, which can create that little hint of distortion at certain frequency levels, which sometimes could be interpreted as making the mid-range sound a bit warmer. That can be really nice. But when you have that little bit of distortion, your mid-range will sound really nice, but it's really challenging using that type of tube to go and get that super clean sense of spaciousness that will contribute in getting that three-dimensional effect and in-room presence. Now, there's a lot of other factors, but I'm only saying this because when I've used really good tubes, so tubes that test pretty much no noise, no distortion, as clean of electron flow as you would want, so that the playback of the music is as much unaltered as it could be by using tubes, you're not going to get that distortion. The tube is actually going to sound cleaner. It's not going to sound like it's bumping up the mids or it's bumping up the upper bass, or worse, sometimes when they're just a little bit noisy, just a hint of noise, it'll make it almost sound like the treble is tilted upwards, but no, it's kind of like the noise gets mixed into the highs. So when you have a good tube, a really good tube, it's not going to give you that little bit of distortion. It'll sound super clean, super deep, super spacious, and you're going to have a serious kick in the bass. And it's actually going to be revealing the nature of the components in the amplifier. So you have to keep that in mind. This is why tube rolling, for a lot of people out there, you get your information off some of these videos and off these YouTubers that are telling you this tube sounds this way and this tube sounds that way. Well, let me tell you, I've seen this from experience, where some tubes I thought were going to add some warmth to my system didn't quite do that, or vice versa actually. And it all has to do with a few things. It has to do with how the tube was broken in, and if the tube is of super high quality, it's going to simply reveal the nature of the components that are in your amplifier or your DAC or your preamp. Now, thank you for putting up with this horrible accent of mine. I'm not quite sure if it's Scottish, Irish. This is a give and take thing, because if you add too much decay, it will come at making your layers in your soundstage potentially suffer a little bit, because then things start to overlap. So you want the decay, but the more decay you have, I think the better your amplifier has to be in order to maintain and to keep up, because it's pushing notes that are still there while it's pushing a lot of other notes. Same thing with the speakers. The speakers have to be able to keep up. In Dave's case, I know that they'll be able to keep up. So now if we were to compare with the strengths of my system, so my system, one of its biggest strengths is that sense of in-the-room presence of instruments. When you're listening to acoustic music, singer-songwriter stuff, jazz, blues, some rock, depends on how heavy the rock is. My system gives a great sense of decay if I want it to. In my preamp, here, the melody, where the rectifier goes, I'm using an external rectifier. So this is made by Space Tech Labs. It is the STR 1001 MK2 Super. Point here is, you can choose as an option to add a so that you can either have it on or off. Off being you're reducing a little bit of the decay and makes the sound seem a little bit faster, sharper, edgier. But when you turn it on, and you can do this on the fly, by the way, you increase the amount of decay.
Huh! Now you know what to ask for Christmas, boys and girls. Ho, ho, ho! Cameras off? Yeah. Huh.
Okay, girls, you can come back in. The camera's off. Let's go. Let's get this done.
So all of these genres of music, both in the bass and in the mids and the high, you really get that feel of the instruments in my room, as well as the voice of the singer. Really, you feel the singer in the room. The other positive of my system that is great is the spacious soundstage. The three-dimensional effect, the height of the soundstage, it's great. Now, in the things that should be improved for my system, the first thing is to be able to play more music genres at that magic level. I don't know that I'll be able to achieve that with the setup that I have now. It would require, I think, a slightly different technology in the terms of speakers that I use, because the drivers I have don't have the physical capabilities, I think, to maintain their resolution and their magic when it's a very, very complex and fast recording with insane dynamics, lots of instruments. Then things start to suffer a little bit. Another thing that needs to be improved with my system is I'm missing that last 10 hertz of the bottom bass layer. So between 20 and 30 hertz, it doesn't really exist in my system. My in-room response is around 30 hertz. The bass drivers I have do go down to 30 hertz. If I didn't have them in the corners of the room, the bass response would not be as good in the 30 hertz range. I'd be more in the 40 hertz range. But using my corner walls as bass horns, I'm getting a much better bass response in the room. But it's still not what Dave has with his speakers, because his speakers play at a very good SPL down in the 20 hertz region.
Okay, so we need to really dive into the strengths and weaknesses of each of our systems. But before we do that, let's have a closer look at Dave's rig. What I did to show you guys Dave's rig is I'm going to take each of his main components and I'm going to find sources online where anyone could go and purchase these on the used market, just to show how attainable this can be with the right amount of patience. So let's start with the speakers. Carver. These Carver open baffle speakers, found a pair on US Audio Mart right here. Let's check this out. Open baffle, there's that big ribbon, starts at 120 hertz, goes all the way up to who knows 20 plus kilohertz. 3 12-inch drivers for how much? $9.95 US for the pair. Wow. Next thing, his old MSB DAC. Check this out. It's under $700. I think Dave picked it up his up for $500 even. So if you're really patient, you could pick this up for a really good bargain. It's a great sounding DAC. Anyways, so third, sorry. Now his phono stage, the Synthesis Roma 79 DC, $1,000 Canadian. So under $1,000 USD, you could find this thing. Beautiful preamp. Check this. It's beautiful, beautiful. Now, next, his turntable, the Opus 3 from Continuo turntable. 1,100 Canadian. Again, that means you could pick this up under $1,000 USD most likely, or around $1,000 USD. What a buy. His Krell KSA 50, 100 watts, Class A, old school Krell. This is built like amps should be built today. It sounds amazing. I can attest to that. And I found it on Reverb for 1,700 Canadian, which means with a little bit of patience, you could definitely find this well under 2,000 USD. Although I would make sure that it has been recapped. And last but not least, let's go see if I can find a Doge 8 preamp for sale. And I'm pretty sure. Well, there you go. Okay, so there's one on the Canadian Audio Mart. It's going to redirect me. Just give me a second. No, taking too long. All right, check this out. 1,100 Canadian for this preamp. Okay, Dave has the mirror faceplate finish, which they made for a very short period of time, but essentially the same preamp overall. Outstanding. And it was really transparent when I was there. Really thought it was excellent. So look at this. You're talking $1,100. Let's round it to 1,000 US. Let's talk US dollars. 1,000, 1,500 US. We're at 2,500. Turntable in USD. What was the price again? Okay, let's put it at 1,000 US. We're at 3,500 US. another 1,000 US for the phono stage, 4,500 US, and then add 500 for the DAC. We're at 5,000 US plus another 1,000 US for the speakers. You're talking a rig for $6,000 that you can get on the used market that is worth well over $15,000 if you were to buy this brand new. And I can attest that the synergy between these speakers and this amplifier with this preamp will give you a result that will rival many, many of the high price rigs you hear at shows. Dave, congratulations. You got a heck of a good system. And you got it at a bargain. You genius. Okay, strengths. Considering they're both open baffle. I have tubes, he's got solid state. I got paper cones, he's got a ribbon. Digital source for my primary, his is vinyl. My strengths, the in-room presence, no veils. It's a three-dimensional soundstage that wraps around a gorgeous sense of decay and realism to the instruments and voices, whereas he's got a consistency of resolution and speed across all music genres. His bass performance is tight, deep, and fast, the warmth of the mid-range, and his resolution is awesome. Now, what could be improved on both sides? From my end, I can't do the magic on all music genres, and I'm missing that 20 hertz range in the low end. Dave, on the other hand, he could improve the amount of veils that are presented in front of his system, the soundstage height, the wraparound effect, and the soundstage depth.
So after a good amount of time listening to Dave's system and getting a good idea of what it is that was happening, I had brought two things for fun, for an experiment. I brought my Frankenstein DAC, my Musical Paradise, my heavily customized Musical Paradise. What's customized in my DAC? I have changed the capacitors from the V capacitors to wax and oil Jupiter capacitors. I have changed the tubes. I use a variation between Linley Elite tubes or Cryotone tubes, and these tubes are spectacular. I have upgraded also the rectifier, which I go back and forth between the 5U4G from Cryotone, and right now I'm testing a 274B from another company that released a new model, which is very decent. Other things, I also upgraded the fuse in the DAC because I'm a very, very much a believer that in hi-fi, signal and power, those two have to be clean and good. And one thing in a component that power goes through at all times is a fuse. That's why if there's a spike in power, the fuse is there to save your gear. Now, if that fuse is of low grade, low quality, there's an impact. Now, like I've said in my previous videos of how to achieve your end game, power is crucial. The cleaner the power, the better everything will sound. Now, hold on. If your speakers use a very poor crossover with very noisy parts that color the sound so much, having clean power in all your components is not going to be felt as much. And if you do have a very cheap crossover that is coloring the heck out of the sound, you might think other things are snake oil too, not just clean power. You might think speaker cables are snake oil. You might think that interconnects are snake oil. And you might even think that upgrading your DAC is full of diminishing returns. Yeah. Anyway, in my experience, take this however you want, disagree with me. Tell me in the comments if you disagree with me, as if you're not going to anyway. Yeah, so I upgraded the fuse, upgraded the rectifier, upgraded the tubes, upgraded the capacitors in my DAC. In fact, the cost of these upgrades was 3 times the price of the DAC new when I bought it. So where does it stand today? Like my friend Thomas at Thomas the Stereo asked me once, he says, instead of spending these thousands of dollars on the upgrade, didn't you think it was more worthwhile to go buy a $4,000 DAC instead? And to which my answer is, I've done that. I had 2. And the customized Musical Paradise blew these 2 $4,000 DAC away. They were great DACs. Love them. Absolutely love them. There were 2 R2R DACs of known brands that are all over the internet these days around the $4,000 mark. One was a little bit more than $4,000 actually, and I had another one that was an FPGA DAC from a very known brand in hi-fi that cost over $5,000, and it did not come close to my DAC. So That's why I decided to go with this DAC and keep the upgrades. So when I decided to say, all right, let's swap some of the components here. The only components I brought is the DAC and my power bar. I don't even want to call it a power conditioner or a power filter. I don't want to call it any of those things. It is a Puritan PSM 156. I have made a video on this before showing reactions of my other buddies. Now in this one, like you saw in the beginning of the video, was Dave's reaction to plugging the DAC into the Puritan and then plugging his phono stage into the Puritan 156. My gut feeling was that the bigger difference would be felt by his phono stage. Because to me, if you take a phono stage, if you look at the signal that comes out of a cartridge, it is so minute in terms of voltage that it then has to be stepped up and applied gain to it. Well, if there's noise in the electrical current along the way in these steps, that noise becomes part of the sound wave when it gets to the preamp and then the amplifier. So my logic was, if you take a microfilm, a video microfilm, that you want to extract an image and blow it up into a poster, there's two parts to consider, which I'll use that as an analogy for clean power. If your lens that you're using to extract the image of the microfilm is full of dust, the dust here being the noise that can come in clean power, when you blow up your poster won't be tack sharp. It won't be clean looking. There's going to be some fuzziness to the edges because you have a dirty lens. Well, dirty power in components that have to take a sound wave that is this big and make it this big for your components to then be able to amplify it. Similar, here comes all the smart keyboard warriors. You don't know what you're talking about. It has a huge impact. And I just heard it. The impact with the DAC is great. I know this. Many of you know this. Clean power on your DAC, big difference. Clean power on your streamer, big difference. Clean power on any digital components, big difference. Phono stage, holy moly. This was a big difference. Okay, I have to tell you, when I had a collection of records and I had a turntable, when I went from a moving magnet to a moving look, it's like a moving magnet cartridge of about $200 to a moving coil low output of close to $2,000, that difference in resolution, in scale, in micro details and macro details, the presence, the feel, the three-dimensionality, I felt almost the same result by inserting his phono stage plugged into the Puritan 156. And like Dave said in the clips, it's not that it was noisy before. It was, that's what I call the veils. Because once the Puritan got in the chain, those veils gone. It felt like his moving magnet. It's not exactly a moving magnet. I forget what he referred to it, but it's not a moving coil, and it's not a moving coil low output. But wow, the performance jump in clarity, like you removed like veil gone, veil gone, veil gone, veil gone. It was like his soundstage went deep and went far back. You had like I was explaining to him, the layers before that were noisy, they're far apart, but the noise occasionally is interfering with each other. When that noise stops, the space, you could feel it. And it was almost like as if also he had deep cleaned his record at the same time. It was just that much better. I was so happy to watch his face when he heard it himself and see his reaction. It was priceless to me. Loved it. And it had the effect I was hoping for. It also showed him that parts of the things that his system could do better could be easily addressed with a Puritan PSM 156 without, and people are like, yeah, but that's an expensive bar. It's a little over $2,000. Right. But guess how much the next level of upgrade in phonostage costs, the next level in preamp costs, the next level in amplifiers, when you're trying to remove these veils that you will not remove or marginally remove if you have an amp that has a much better noise control, better cleaner circuit, same with your preamp, same with the phonostage, you will spend far more than $2,000. So if you get a Puritan 156, they realized, whoa, all right, that's what he said, I don't need to change my phonostage. No, he doesn't. Add clean power, you get to see how good your equipment is. Keep calling the snake oil all you want. Sure, enjoy your hunt of more gear and more gear and more gear. Have at it. It's fun. I get it. But stop complaining that your system has veils. And a lot of people say, mine doesn't have veils. They don't. But like Dave realized, he didn't think his system was veiled up until he heard his system without them. So the other thing that to me was even more fascinating, because I had a good idea. I kind of knew that the Puritan was going to do what it was doing. Oh, that's scientific. It was doing what it was doing. But when I hooked up my DAC, Dave's first words were, whoa, it sounds like your system now. What? Wait a sec. It's like, what do you mean it sounds like my system? He's like, that sense of presence, the instruments, again, more veils are lifted, the three-dimensionality of the soundstage, the attack in the skin of the drums, the feel of the wood of the guitars, the voices. He was like, whoa. But to him to say, it sounds like my system, and then I heard too, and I was like, yeah, you know what? It does sound very similar to my place. The only thing that still was kind of different was the overall soundstage presentation, but that, I think, really has to do also with positioning in the room, artifacts in the room. That's different. From one place to another, you'll get a good amount of similar soundstage, but if you don't have the space to develop and the distance between you, the speakers, behind you, things on the side of the speakers, etc., the soundstage might be a little bit tricky to maximize just with gear. You need to have the positioning as well. But Dave was right. It sounded like my system. And yet, he's a solid state amplifier. I'm a tube amplifier. Ribbons versus paper cone full range drivers? What? Both with my DAC sounded almost the same. Not quite, but the similarities were very, very present and astonishing. Almost overwhelming at times, because not overwhelming in the sense that you can't tell the difference. Overwhelming in the sense that it was so surprising and it was baffling our minds at first. But then I got very happy that this was happening. And I was very happy for Dave as well, because that showed that the transparency of his equipment is awesome. He can take any source, plug it into a system, and he will tell the differences like that. And I can tell you that's not the case with everyone's system. Some systems have a bit of coloration to them, either via the type of amplifier they have or the crossovers in their speakers. There's a bunch of reasons for coloring sound. And the more the coloring of the sound happens at the speaker level, the less you feel the differences upstream from that. Now, insert clean power on top of it. It was very hard to differentiate, even for me, to tell you what the differences were now at that moment between his rig and my rig. All with the same DAC. Very different preamp, very different amplifier, and very different speakers. Cables? Nowhere near the same. Dave uses fancy, expensive audiophile cables that he likes. He's tried tons. He settled on the ones that he likes, not the ones that are the most expensive, the ones that he likes the nature of the sound. My cables, I won't even tell anybody what my cables are. In fact, there's no point. I'll give you one hint as to what cables I use. They're cheap. My speaker cables, I made them myself for $300. Interconnects, I don't think they pass $200. None of this $1,000 stuff. And I've had some. I've had the MIT stuff. I had the transparent stuff. Meh. Got rid of them. Donated them to my brother's system. That's right. Nice gift. I couldn't justify it. It didn't work for me. And one of the reasons why I won't mention what my cables are is that if people think that these are the cables to save everyone's hi-fi rig down the line, A, the demand for these cables is going to skyrocket. The price is going to follow. No thanks. No thanks. And besides, in the process, I'll also be called a ton of names saying that these cables don't do a difference. Right, that's also because your system's probably being colored, or you didn't let these cables break in for a good 100 hours. Trust me, makes a difference. Anything that's current flowing through it, let it settle down, let it run its course, then they start to shine. Unless you're a cryotone tube, and for some crazy freaking reason, cryotone tubes sound spectacular day 1 and day 1000. All right. Fascinating though. Dave's system is so transparent that by putting my DAC in there, I felt like I was home. So someone would say, yeah, swapping gear, if you have the same speakers, it might sound the same. If your speakers are transparent and resolving, you can have a lot of fun. If you're changing components and you get to a point where you're like, wait a sec, I don't hear a big difference. Stop. Something, either your speakers or your amplifier or the combination of the two, could be coloring your sound, or maybe your preamp is coloring the sound. It depends. So, this to me was a great learning experience as to what you can actually do when you have a really good matching of your speakers and your amp. Dave's Carver speakers and his Krill amplifier is a phenomenal match. Honestly, phenomenal match. Also, think that after this experience, Dave's rig is the winner. Why? Because it plays any genre. It does it well. It's got better bass performance. His soundstage could be optimized based on the room. So the way he has it set up is how his room really allows it to be set up. So it's fine. All he has to remind himself, if ever he's fussy on a soundstage one day and wants to change it, he just has to remember that this is what his room is going to allow the soundstage to be. So don't chase other things. Don't go buy other speakers or whatnot. You're fine. And to improve the removal of these veils, well, he saw that Clean Power cleans that up real well. So if he cleans the power, then his rig will outperform mine across most of the characters and parameters. Sure, I might have a few niche things that might be very hard to knock out, but they're small. Whereas Dave will have, out of 10 points, Dave will beat me on 9 of the points. So Dave, thank you so much for this evening. Happy to have built this connection and friendship with you. I hope we get to collaborate more. I think we can learn a lot from each other. This is a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, guys, really, do you believe me? Do you think that a transparent system can sound like another transparent system with completely different gear just by changing the source? Let me know. Or if you're confused about all this shit, send me an email. You'd make a bunch of people jealous. I think you're doing it absolutely right. You're using calling it a moving magnet. It's not exactly that, but Basically, it's not a moving coil, so
It's
not a-
moving iron, yeah. It's a Negaoka MP500.
you're doing absolutely right because you're getting all the benefits of an open baffle speaker. You're lucky because you have open baffle speakers that have killer low end. Because a lot of people are like, there's no bass in open baffles. I'm
Well-
like, people need to wake up.
Also, the positioning of them, because they're kind of almost in the center of the room.
Mm-hmm.
There's just
It's
as much
true.
room behind them as there is in front of them.
Yes, yes.
And then my seating position is, 2 or 3 feet off the back wall.
Yeah. You're using a gorgeous Class A amplifier with
From-
a tube preamp.
40 years ago.
Yep, and that's perfectly fine.
That's been rebuilt by Audiophiles.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Very cool. When you have a turntable, Class A, open baffles, and a tube preamp, it works. Let me tell you, it works.
I'm pleased to hear that because it's just like
very good.
your own system. You listen to it, you like it, you tune it the way you like. Like,
Mhm.
will other people like it? I don't know. Is it?
You're
And so
for a few tracks, I would look at your turntable and I'm like, oh, maybe, maybe. But what stops me is I look at your collection of records, and I don't
Yeah.
have my collection of records anymore. And
yeah,
to build a collection of records today, from scratch, it's
I wouldn't recommend it.
no.
I honestly,
neither.
I mean, I have the first records I ever bought as a teenager, and then I've just been buying them and putting them in shelves ever since. So
Yeah.
it's easy to.
I had a similar amount to you. You have like what, 400 or 500?
No, there's almost 2,000 between.
You have 2,000 with all. Oh my goodness. Oh, so I had more records than I thought.
yeah,
Yeah, because I had 2 cabinets just like this full,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think I didn't have that extra.
There's 80 or 90 in each square here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had about. Did you dabble into those very expensive records like the MoFi super pressings, the analog productions?
No. I have. What is this one? Oh, I think this one is. What is this?
That looks expensive. Nina Simone.
Yeah,
I had that one.
This was a gift.
Oh no, that's not the one I had. Sorry, I didn't have that one.
What is this? I've had a couple, but this one's pretty good. Analog Productions, I think, is
That's
as
productions.
that's as rich as I go. But most of them are just
But even Rich's, like analog productions are not cheap.
yeah.
Brand new. They're what are they? $80 each
Yeah,
now?
that's too rich for my blood. Like, pretty much everything that I've bought in the last 20 years is used. Couple of them new, but 25, $30 is as much as I'll spend, and I don't have multiples. It's I get what I get, and that's how it sounds. So.
Yeah, Jethro Tull. Yes.
I got a bunch of Jethro Tull.
Love this album. So awesome.
Yeah, so I was interested in hearing, because I know some people really don't like pops and ticks on records and surface noise, and that just kind of ruins it for them. And maybe it's a generational thing, if you didn't grow up with it, and then you put it on and it's like, oh, what is this noise? I don't, that's foreign to me, and it's too distracting. For me, especially when I got this cartridge, because it's got such a fine cantilever and fine diamond, I find that the pops and ticks are quieter, but also completely separate from the music.
Right.
Like the music has its own dimension, and then
Agreed.
it's just kind of.
Agreed. But I find that's what I don't like when the system is too high end.
I find really high-end systems become almost like a caricature, an exaggeration of life, sort of.
That there was the TAD system at Montreal.
Yes, it was very like wow.
It was like an IMAX of everything.
Yes, exactly. Everything was so grand, so refined, so detailed.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like that when you listen to live music. It's not that.
Yeah.
Live music is actually a little bit aggressive to your ears at times. It
Yeah.
can sound a bit muffled. Sometimes it can sound a bit boomy, depending on where
You
you're
got a
sitting.
trumpet playing, a real trumpet.
Oh,
playing in your
it's
face.
in your-
It's like, that's
Yes.
grating. That's,
Absolutely.
Yeah.